we are going to do an exercise. So we have a 35-year-old woman who was exposed to radiation on February 1. She has a positive urine pregnancy test on March 15. Last menstrual period was January the 1st, and the duration of the menstrual cycle is 35 days. So we want to know how does the radiation is going to affect the baby. So first of all, or basically what we want to know is how many weeks gestation, how many weeks of gestation is the woman. So we have a menstrual cycle duration of 35 days, and the last menstrual period was January 1. So first we need to calculate when was the ovulation date, which is going to be the conception date or fertilization date. So we are going to put a 35-day cycle. This is week 1 of the cycle. This is week 2 of the cycle, week 3. All this is the FSH predominant phase. Let's say here we will have like menses. Here we have the proliferative phase. Then we have the constant 2 weeks of predominant LH phase, which is in this case week 4 and week 5 of the menstrual cycle. This is the secretory phase. Again, another cycle would be week 1 of the menstrual cycle, week 2, week 3, all this is proliferative phase or FSH phase. This is week 4 of the menstrual cycle, week 5. These 2 weeks are the LH phase or secretory phase. And let's put another one. Week 1, week 2, week 3 of the menstrual cycle, the proliferative phase, and then the 2 weeks of secretory phase. And so let's suppose ovulation occurred this date here. Here was the ovulation. So when we have an increased amount of estrogens between the proliferative phase and the secretory phase. And if it was the case after ovulation, then there was the conception. So this is a 35-day menstrual cycle. Last menstrual period was January 1. So let's suppose that if the ovulation was here, so last menstrual period was here, was the last menstrual period of this cycle is here, or the menses day of this menstrual cycle is here. So if this was the conception date, this is the last menstrual period. And so how many days apart is the last menstrual period from the conception date? If this is a 35-day cycle and the secretory phase always is constant and is 14 days or 2 weeks. So 35-day long cycle minus 14 days of the secretory phase. This is the proliferative phase is 21 days. So the distance between, or the duration, the distance between the last menstrual period and the ovulation, the conception date, is 21 days. So if her last menstrual period was January the 1st, so January the 1st is the last menstrual period, 21 days after is going to be the ovulation. Here, 21 days after, which is the duration of the proliferative phase, is the ovulation date or the conception date. So 21 days after, this will be January 21. January 21 is the conception date. January 21. So she received radiation on February the 1st. So how many weeks pregnant is she during February 1 or on February 1 if conception was on 21, January 21? So from January 21 to February 1 is like 10 days more or less. So from January 21 to February 1 is like 10 days more or less. 10 days. In this case, we clearly estimated the conception date because we know exactly the date of the last menstrual cycle and we know the duration of the menstrual cycle. So based in this specific case, based on the conception date, she was exposed to radiation when she was 10 days pregnant. 10 days pregnant, this is between 1 and 2 weeks. 1 to 2 weeks pregnant. So if we have, when we are talking about teratogens, if a pregnant woman is exposed to teratogens before or equal to when she's 2 weeks pregnant, here either the embryo will survive or the embryo will die. So if the woman is exposed to a teratogen before 2 weeks, here is pretty much Bolan. The embryo will survive or the embryo will die. Between 3 to 8 weeks of gestation, again starting from last menstrual period. This is the interval when we have the highest probability of teratogenicity, which means that here the teratogen can affect the fetuses. And after 9 weeks of gestation, the teratogens can affect the fetus, but something like growth restriction, for example. But here it can affect, for example, defect of neural tube defects, or limb hypoplasia, or saddle nose, or if we are talking about alcohol exposure, syndrome of alcohol fetal syndrome. So here we have like what teratogens means. But after 9 weeks gestation, here pretty much the teratogens what to do is like restriction of growth. It's not teratogen here, it's like growth restriction. So before 2 weeks of gestation is either Bolan, the embryo will survive or the embryo will die. The greatest risk of teratogenicity is between 3 to 8 weeks, and after 9 weeks, if there is some concern, is more about growth restriction. Here we have 10 days based on conception date. So remember that we need to add we need to add 2 weeks to the conception date to have the gestational age in in menstrual period date or menstrual period weeks, but in this case we need to add 3 weeks because this is a 35-day long cycle. So she is 10 days pregnant based on conception date, but if we're going to measure in gestational weeks from menstrual period, it will be 10 days plus 21 days, which would be 31 days, which is like a month pregnant, which is like 4 weeks. So the other thing we can do is when was the first time the urine pregnancy test was going to be positive, because she had done the pregnancy test on March 15, but this could have been positive earlier than March 15. So the urine pregnancy test is positive after 2 weeks. 2 weeks after implantation, or 2 weeks after fertilization, which is when the implantation of the placenta starts. The implantation of the placenta starts. So if conception date was January 21 plus 2 weeks, I mean January 21 plus 14 days, that is like around February 15. So around February 15, the pregnancy test would have been positive, even though she had positivity test on March 15, but probably March 14, 13, February 29, up to February 15, the pregnancy test was going to be positive. So this is just like an exercise to be more familiar, to have the adjustment of the ovulation, secretory, proliferative phase based on the menstrual cycle duration.